the Losail International Circuit. Gotta say, man, I'm not a fan.
It's only the second time Formula One has been there, and we had a lot of controversy, I think, throughout the weekend, including the sprint, the track changes, maximum stint tire life.
Yeah, like painting part of the curb halfway through the weekend. Just forget about the rest of the events. Here you go, boys. This is how it's going to be going forward. I think I would rather watch the camels.
Right down the street, right?
Yeah.
Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
Welcome back to our very late Qatar Grand Prix recap. We're your hosts, Jeremiah
And Thomas. And we do have jobs and family commitments that we're not always able to get these videos out as fast as we would like.
Sorry, guys. So we were at the Losail International Circuit this weekend for the Qatar Grand Prix. We'll go into a little bit of the weekend wrap-up, but first I want to get your overall thoughts.
So this was a sprint weekend, which we are still not fully accustomed to the format. I guess we'll get used to it in time. I've made the point time and time again that NASCAR started introducing bits like the playoffs because they were losing viewership. Formula One's at an all-time high viewership. Why have all this extra mess that just confuses viewers, I think? Because you go practice only,
Yeah.
quali for the race, then sprint shootout, then sprint race, then race. And I think if you're somebody that's new to the sport of F1, you're confused.
On top of that, the rookies depend on these practice sessions on tracks they've never been to and when they're racing in the lower series so that they can learn the track and kind of optimize how they're going to be for this actual race. And they're not getting any of that. They get the one practice session, that's it. Then they're learning the track in qualifying? I'm sorry, no.
And I think one of the things that took us the longest to understand how it worked was part ferme, right? Like, how does a car setup work? How does what you're restricted, not restricted, what can you change, what can't you change? Why does this guy have to start in the pit lane because he changed something? And suddenly you get to the sprint weekend and you have the reporters and the announcers and all that talking to the drivers being like, hey, what are your thoughts now that your car setup is locked in after one practice session on a track that they've only ever been to one time and it's 110 degrees Fahrenheit and you're giving them one practice session?
That's absolutely ridiculous. We're going to complain about that a lot more, but first I want to jump into the weekend, the kind of the earlier stages, the practice sessions, qualifying, talk about the sprint race and the sprint shootout. We'll start with the only practice session. This track, this is where you first got the exposure that this track is a slip and slide. It's completely covered in dust. There's strong winds that are pushing the cars in whatever direction they so please. Everyone goes off the track. I mean, there might have been 3 cars, 4 cars, maybe that didn't go off the track during the practice session. But it seemed like every time I looked away, I'd look back and somebody was flying off the track somehow and trying to get back on and kicking a bunch of dust and dirt onto the track.
The drivers were probably hoping there was an actual slip and slide in the paddock waiting for them when they were done to cool off a little bit.
Right. I'll give you a little fun bit for the actual practice. Lando Norris goes off the track, breaks one of the braking meters. It was the 500 braking meter.
I find it comical when, every F1 track now, right? The barriers, the walls, the advertisements, it is carefully coordinated. Mm-hmm. All of it is approved. And yet you have issues like him breaking boards. And then you have, remember back to Esteban Ocon with the Rolex ad, Ping Direct,
just dragging it around the track.
Pierre Gasly, dragging around a Rolex ad. And he's like, how does this happen? He's coming on his mic asking how that happens.
That's good marketing for Rolex, despite what you may think.
They had to partner with Pierre after
Airtime. That's pretty much it for your practice session. That was, I mean, we can go into times. relatively kind of the same stuff that you see on a regular basis throughout previous weekends. So it's nothing dramatic. I just wanted to touch on kind of what my feel was from watching that practice session. Qualifying, however, gets a little bit more dicey. We'll start with qualifying 1. You have Stroll, Lawson, Magnussen, Zhou, and Sargent going out. I don't think there's any dramatics there. We saw Lance Stroll throw a little temper tantrum in the garage whenever he got out of his car. Go figure. Imagine that.
You know, it says a lot. The past 8 races, he has been running with the Sargents, the Sonodas, the Haas cars. Dude, you're with Aston Martin, who is a top 5 constructor.
Yeah. Meanwhile, your teammate is still somehow managing to run with the Ferraris from time to time whenever they bring a good setup. But majority of the time, the Alpines, but they're faster than the Alpines. Or no, he is faster than the Alpines.
I was concerned after Q1 because if you might remember back to our predictions, which we'll get to, we'll review our predictions. I said no points for the Alpines this weekend. And here they are going 7th and 8th in Q1. And I'm like, uh-oh.
Well, to that point, I'm going to have to say, doesn't look good for you. We'll go into Q2. This is where we get a little bit of dicey action out there. Hülkenberg goes out. Sometimes he makes it to Q3. Sometimes he doesn't, so that's not the biggest surprise. Albon goes out, which that stinks. I definitely wanted Albon to score.
He's on the bubble. It's 50-50 whether he makes it into Q3 every week.
It's the same with Hülkenberg, though. Sometimes they just get a good lap together and they get thrown out into Q3. Tsunoda goes out, which at this point I'm starting to get worried for Tsunoda. You can't just sometimes be able to get 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th in qualifying, and then sometimes you're just out in Q2. Granted, Q2 is good, but
4,000th of a second to Bottas.
So Q3. And I'm going to give you 2 versions of Q3 because we got a bunch of lap times that were deleted after the fact. So we had the top 10, final 10 rather. Verstappen, Norris, Russell, Piastri, Hamilton, Alonso, Leclerc, Gasly, Ocon, Bottas. Now, afterwards, during the interviews, they were looking for Lando Norris for the P2 spot so that they could give him an interview. Lando Norris walked off, and which made the reporter freak out because she had no idea what was going on. She ended up talking to Piastri, who moves up from 4 to 3rd. Halfway through Piastri's interview, they go, and we've just received word that your lap time was actually deleted. And then a little pop-up underneath them shows up that says P6 or 6. And I was like, oh, no. And then he's like, oh, great. And she goes, so now you're going to be 6th. And he just gives the old thumbs up.
Just walks away.
So after the lap times were deleted, your new qualifying for the final 10. Verstappen, Russell, Hamilton, Alonso, Leclerc, then Piastri, Gasly, Ocon, Bottas, and down in P10, Lando Norris.
We're going to talk about this maybe next week. I don't know, on our regular podcast episodes, maybe this week, who knows, but about the controversy behind Max Verstappen's championships, right? That's on the docket coming up. I want to tie into that conversation how quick they are to report a race result or results on a broadcast only for the change to come moments later. Because if you remember back to Max Verstappen's championship last year, they didn't know that he had won until after they had already interviewed him as not the champion.
They're in the middle of talking to Sergio, and they're like, hey, get back over there. Max, come here real quick. We just...
Like, they're so quick to jump the gun. And I don't know if that's a broadcast thing. I know they're trying to give instant results to the fans. I think the FIA or the stewards or whatever need to have a quicker... Like, you can't be deleting lap times 10 minutes after the thing is ended.
That's tough, though, because there's so many different camera angles they have to watch. And
Then
they have to
hire
watch
more
everybody.
people.
That's fair.
You're the FIA.
That's fair. So that is how your qualifying plays out. We'll jump into the sprint qualifying or the sprint shootout. Here again, 3 different sections, or sessions rather. The first one, Sargent, Magnussen, Stroll, Albon, and Tsunoda out. This one hurt because both Williams are out, which, fine. Sargent, we expect. But Albon out in shootout 1 or Q1, however you want to put it. That was hurtful, man. And again, who do we see? Lance Stroll.
And not even really close. They were both up 0.4 seconds, 0.6 seconds on the top 10. I mean, not even close.
That hurts. So shootout 2, session 2, whatever you want to call it. Zhou and Bottas, by the way, made it out of Q1, which was sweet. So, but they both go out in the second qualifying session. Lawson goes out, which, if you remember, I said Tsunoda went out in Q1. So Lawson made it to Q2. Here again, makes me worry for Sonoda. I genuinely think that they should just drop him for Lawson at this point. He's quick.
They've already re-signed him, though. It's going to be Sonoda Ricardo next year.
He's so quick, though.
They confirmed, I think, last week.
Now for the fun bit. Lewis Hamilton out in the second session.
All right.
Jeez. And the final one, Pierre Gasly, one of the Alpines.
Yeah, but the other one snuck in.
Yeah, you'll have that, I guess. So we'll talk about the final shootout. I'll give you the 10. I didn't see any lap times deleted or any kind of massive changes afterwards, so the results stand as far as what I could tell. The 1-2 spot, Piastri and Norris, with Norris having that so close chance at getting the pole position until he biffed it right on the last corner going down to the final straight.
I think we called it last week. McLaren has, I think, cemented themselves as the number 2 constructor in the back half of the season. They have propelled themselves above Ferrari, I think, clearly. Mercedes would be the only team I think that you could still debate a little bit with.
They teeter.
But we're seeing more consistent results out of the McLaren every single week.
Which stinks, man, because their point deficit in the beginning of the year is going to cause them to fall way lower in the constructors than I think they deserve. They should get there should be like a comeback reward or something that they can get where they get an extra money bonus. Something.
What sport is it where they have like a first half season champion and a second half season champion? That's a thing. I don't know if it's soccer or something, but they have like a first half of the season, second half of the season,
Dude, I have
and they have like
no
a tournament.
idea.
I think they will use. So I asked a couple of weeks ago. I said, will this be kind of disappointing? Will they be dejected after the season? Like, we did all this hard work. We got so many podiums, so many wins towards the end of the season, only to finish 4th in the standings or whatever it is. I think they're going to use that as a springboard into next year.
Absolutely.
And they're going to say, look at what we did in the back half of next year. Our car is now the number 2 performing car. We're beating Perez every single race. We just have to steal a couple from Verstappen, right? That's the idea.
So I stopped with the McLarens. Verstappen gets that 3rd spot. Then we go Russell, Sainz, Leclerc, Hülkenberg, Perez, Alonso, and Ocon. So Perez dropped as far as he did because he did get a lap time that was deleted, but it wasn't 10 minutes after the qualifying session took place. It was actually while they were on track. So he falls down. He's going to get that 8th spot. Way to go, Hülkenberg, man, getting that 7th spot. All right.
Too bad it's just for a sprint and not a race. Let me know in the comments what y'all's thoughts are on Sergio Perez. I used to be a very big Sergio Perez fan and supported him, and I still think he's a good driver, but I think he is underperforming in the Red Bull car.
I don't know if it's just the massive amount of pressure that's on his shoulders for Red Bull to replace him and for all the fans calling for Red Bull to replace him, or what it is, but maybe it's just the fact that he sees the storming times that Max Verstappen's putting down, and it kind of makes him want to hide away from the limelight instead of try and go after him. Because in the first half of the season, we saw Sergio targeting Max the whole time. Yep. And it seems like he just lost that fire.
And I don't understand because every single season that he's been partnered with Max, there's always been kind of a lull in his seasons, 2 or 3 races where he has a recovery drive or something.
Right.
This has been the past 15 races.
Yeah, it's a full half.
Ever since his last win in, I don't know, whenever he won Baku or whatever, I think it was Azerbaijan, right?
I believe so.
Ever since then, it hasn't even been a fall off. He just dropped off and then stayed down.
It's a drop off and then a recovery, drop off, recovery, drop off, recovery.
But he's not recovering to the podium.
Right.
Anymore.
And now we're starting to see there's not even a recovery. The recovery might be him getting 10th, 9th,
Points.
8th. That's ridiculous. And the fastest car on the track?
Like, we know Max is great, but that Red Bull car is awesome.
Yes, it is an amazing car. If you put Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, Lewis Hamilton, if you put George Russell, Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc in there, it's a battle with Max.
Yep.
You put Sergio in that car, and he's 5 cars, 6 cars, 7 cars back.
So just let me know what y'all's thoughts are on him, because I'm interested to know what the other fans' perspective might be.
The sprint race. This one broke my heart, as on lap 1, we see Liam Lawson just completely lose it. He had a whip where it started to correct to the other side. He tried to correct it, whip it back, and he just goes flying off the track. That's the end of Liam's day.
Oh.
Max Verstappen bogs down on the start and just gets engulfed in the Ferrari red, which, granted, the Ferraris both started on soft tires. So did George Russell and Max Verstappen, both of the McLarens, and Lewis Hamilton. I'm sure others passed that. I'm just talking about the front runners. All started on medium.
You know, we said that it was like 50-50 whether Albon makes it into Q3 every week. It's also 50-50 whether Max bogs down on a start.
Which is getting weird because I don't think his reflexes are slower than everybody else.
He moves physically at the same time as everybody else.
But the car doesn't go.
Way slower.
Is it? Maybe it's a combination of he's not using enough throttle. Maybe he's got too much throttle and it's causing him to get a little bit of a spin. I don't know what it is, but he's bogging down almost every other start.
Every time. Maybe that's just a feature of the car.
Maybe, but we've also seen some good getaways from him. So I don't know. We'll have to look into that a little bit further. Sargent goes off the track. And it's funny, I got a text from our friend John at the beginning of that day, before the sprint race took place, that said, I'll bet you Logan Sargent crashes.
And it's odd, too, because the only thing in Qatar to crash is either yourself or other cars. There's no barriers. There's no walls. I mean, there's some big curbs, but, like, it's basically if you just lose control of the car, you're going off into the gravel.
It's rough to see. But that brings out another safety car. At this time, George Russell has overtaken. By the way, Lando also gets sucked up into the back. So him and Max are going to have to fight their way back for the rest of this sprint race. George Russell gets ahead of Oscar Piastri before this whole safety car, before Logan Sargent goes off the track. So now it's a safety car with George Russell in front on softs. Oscar is behind in the mediums that are cooling down because of the safety car. George gets an amazing restart. He just goes flying into the distance as if Oscar was just sleeping during that whole thing.
There's some of that to the tire compounds, I think, too.
Which is why I thought it was worth mentioning and reminding people what tire compounds everybody was on.
Right.
But at the end of the day, that big of a jump? No. I think that Oscar wasn't ready to go at that part in the track because it was a weird spot.
Where did we see that before where it was Piastri and Verstappen? I can't remember which one was ahead, but Oscar was caught napping or just couldn't keep up.
I don't remember the track, but I do know what you're talking about. It's just maybe it's a thing with Oscar that he's going to have to learn how to really zone in on that driver and know when he can start going, and just from that moment on, just anticipate. Like, at any moment, I just got to slam this throttle down. Ocon takes out Hülkenberg. This one gets a little dicey because Hülkenberg or Ocon are fighting out in front. Perez is back behind. Ocon and Hülkenberg. Hülkenberg goes for the switchback to get on Ocon, so now Hülkenberg's on the outside for the next corner. Ocon just goes flying deep into the corner, and Perez comes up upside next to them, so now they're going 3 wide into this corner, and Ocon just, I don't know if he loses it, if he's not watching the mirrors or what, but he sandwiches Hülkenberg, who tries to slam on the brake and get out of it at the last second. Barely gets out, but he still has wing damage, so that's pretty much going to be it for his sprint race, which stinks, man, because he had such a great qualifying. So now we've got Perez out in the dirt, Ocon out in the dirt, Hülkenberg barely limping, and just like that, Max Verstappen is your new 2023 Drivers' Champion.
He wins it in a sprint race that he didn't win.
And the race wasn't even over yet. It's just because the only person that could catch him is now out in the dirt.
Because the idea was that pretty much Max would have to collect no points the rest of the year, and Sergio would have to win every single sprint, race, fastest lap, all of it. Which
is ridiculous. Max, for the next 5 races, whatever are left, Max would have only needed to get 3 points in any of those races to be crowned the champion.
So we'll talk about this quickly because we still have the race to get into, but the fact that Russell, right? I think Hamilton was on mediums, right? But Russell was on the softs. I get why a team might want to run 2 different strategies, but they should have known those softs on that abrasive track. And I was pulling up the historical data. It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit at the time of the sprint on a black tarmac surface in the desert. Those tires aren't going to last 19 or 20 laps, however long the sprint race was. They're not made for that.
Right. And to top that off, the FIA even put in after this session, after this sprint race, they implemented that the drivers need to pit at a certain time because they're getting chewed up. The tires are getting chewed up on the inside. And so because of that, they feared that with the risk of there being a puncture or a tire just coming off and putting a driver's safety at risk, they just said, we're going to do minimum lap times that you can do. We have a certain set. You cannot go any longer, which is ridiculous because it takes out strategy.
On race day, it was 102 to 105 degrees during the race.
And that's at night.
Yeah. Hot.
We'll finish off the sprint race here. Oscar Piastri gets his first ever win in Formula One. Granted, it's not a feature race, but he gets it done.
We've mentioned this before. Oscar Piastri is clearly showing that he belongs on the grid in a top performing car.
Yeah.
He's the next one. He's there with George Russell, and he's going to be a Max Verstappen and all that. I think he will outperform Lando Norris long term.
It's going to take time.
He's got a way better track record than Lando Norris. He's got a better track record than anybody.
Right.
I mean, Max Verstappen didn't even compete in F2, so he's got that up on Max Verstappen.
Okay, well, there's a reason he didn't compete in F2. He was that good.
But he is showing that he can put a car in a winning position time after time.
The only problem with this, the only thing that bothered me is that Max Verstappen gets all the limelight because he's now the 2023 Drivers' Champion. And Oscar Piastri, he gets his flowers. Don't get it twisted. He definitely gets recognition, but you could definitely tell everybody was all gung-ho about Red Bull. In fact, Red Bull, he pulls the Red Bull car up on the podium in the front spot, like up on the actual, like where it's all decorated and it's the big TV behind it. And Oscar Piastri pulls over to the side. He won the race.
You know what? Welcome to the league, kid.
I guess.
That's how it goes.
19 laps, 5 DNFs.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Hulkenberg, Ocon, Perez, Sargent, Lawson, all out in a 19-lap race.
Because not only were their tires cooked, but that track was already super slippery, and the curbs. I don't know if you saw the images of the curbs, but they were going viral online. Some of those curbs on the side were like those triangle bump curbs, like 8 inches off the ground.
Yeah.
So if you hit one of those, your grip is gone if you're
Right.
trying to go around a turn.
To make matters worse, they did practice one, and then I believe they did qualifying for the feature race. And then right before the sprint shootout started, they repainted either turn 13 or turn 14 to bring it in more so drivers aren't taking that as deep. And they gave the drivers like an hour to acclimate, or maybe less. It was like 10 minutes. Like it was something super short. But these guys have been running this track with this setup, this specific way, and you know how precise they are. They miss barriers by millimeters. So for you to bring in one of the corners just a little bit, it threw everything off for the rest of the weekend.
Well, let's refer back to the 2005 Indianapolis Grand Prix. They determined the tires to not be safe going around that big bank turn, and one of the suggestions was, let's add a chicane. Let's change the turn. And they said, no, we can't do that. That's not safe. Yet here they are repainting crap.
And everybody flies off at that corner.
And then gets penalized for track limits.
That rounds out your sprint race. Let's get into the feature.
Okay. So real quick before we go into the sprint race, to remind you of the qualifying that happened now 700 hours ago, because none of this makes any sense. You are going to have Perez starting in the pit lane. You have Carlos Sainz not racing.
He had either a fuel leak, fuel pump leak, I think it was, just out.
Which they didn't cover it a lot on the broadcast. And my only question is, fix it in the pit if you can. Maybe they couldn't fix it. Maybe that was part of the problem.
Maybe.
Fix it in the pit and do a pit lane start, because as we saw, there was a safety car on lap 1 that he would have been right back in the action.
Also, let's put a little things in perspective here. You have a multi-million-dollar car, and you can't race because it's leaking fuel in a spot.
I remember the day when old Jeremiah was out on the rough roads of Lone Star Kart Park with gas just dribbling all over his leg.
Yeah, and you know what? I got a free race out of that. And I still had fun. I didn't pull off into the pits because I knew my race would be over. And I'm a true racer. I wasn't going to let that happen.
As he walked to the car, he fired up the cigarette and forgot and just went up in flames. This was also, I believe, if I heard the broadcast right, the first time maximum lap stints were enforced on tires.
Yeah.
Of course, there were the times when no pit stops were allowed or anything like that, so a little bit weird how you view that rule. And then something that I noted from the practices and the qualifying and the sprint, turns 4 and 5, which is the first set of like the 3 fingers that jut out from the track if you're looking at the aerial view, a really good place for overtaking that I don't think anybody thought about. 4 and 5, pretty much anytime somebody went for a pass on the outside in this race, it's turns 4 and 5, which I found really interesting. But back to the grid, the Alpines were 7th and 8th. My prediction was pretty much burst at that point.
In the mud, as they say.
Piastri, of course, as you mentioned, was demoted from 4th to 6th. I put Alonso back in the top 4. that didn't really play out as well. And then, of course, you had Russell 2 and Verstappen 1. Okay. You got the race start?
The Turn 1 breakdown, courtesy of Turn 1 podcast. So, Verstappen has a great getaway, which is what I talked about, where we sometimes do see that. Verstappen gets a great getaway, but we have George Russell and Lewis Hamilton knocking on the door, coming behind them. Lewis, I don't know what he was thinking, but they go essentially 3 wide into the very first turn. Lewis comes in way too far when he had half of the track still open to his left, comes in, knocks into George. Both Mercedes go off the track, George spinning. Now, George is able to recover, get back on the track, but Lewis has one tire that just goes flying into the nether realm.
Now, to be fair, Lewis had a fantastic jump.
Oh, dude.
The best. And George was stuck behind Max because Max came in to cover him off.
Sure.
And so George was playing a little bit of a sketchy game. But if you're Lewis, you either cleanly make that pass or you back out and it's still George's spot. Instead, he decided to crash into George.
And then blame it on George.
He took option 3 in that situation.
He comes on the radio. He's talking about taken out by my own teammate. Now, granted, during the race, they do interview Lewis whenever he's had time to look at it, and he does take full responsibility of it.
You have to.
And, part of me wonders if he didn't just do that so the FIA heard that when they're making their decisions and giving George a penalty or not.
I think in the moment, I think Lewis thought he or George had way more room than they actually did. And I don't think he realized how shallow that turn was and that George and Max were already on the inner edge of that turn.
Right. So this causes a pileup. The cars behind are going to suffer. So now the inside line is the fastest line as everybody else is stuck behind George, who's spiraling out of control. So Piastri and Ocon take full advantage of this and move up to second and fourth. You have Alonso, Leclerc, and Gasly all being held up by this incident, losing spots to Piastri and Ocon. So those 3 drop down. Norris stays on the inside line. He's going to pass Gasly and Bottas, who are slowed by the Mercedes. Like I said with Gasly earlier, Bottas was also part of this. Tsunoda stays on the inside line. He's going to get past Bottas as well. Magnussen gets a great start, stays on the inside, passes 3 cars on the jump. Perez starts from the pit lane, so he's going to have to play catch up to everybody else. We're not going to see a lot of that. Lewis Hamilton is out of this. George Russell's knocked down to 17th. Everybody else holds position. And I made a note here of Carlos Sainz not starting. He would have started 12th.
Would have. But he didn't race.
That is your turn 1 breakdown. From there, take it away.
So this week we wanted to talk a little bit more about the Qatar Grand Prix as a whole. I'll give a couple of key moments from the race of just things that I watched. I will be honest, I did not thoroughly enjoy the Qatar Grand Prix as much as I do the other races. We'll talk about that in a minute. Lap 4, this is when the race resumed after the safety car from lap 1. Perez has found his way up into 13th, which I found fascinating. Again, he's got to keep having these recovery drives, but he is really good at getting to the points and then just kind of stalling out. Lap 6 is where you see the first long way around pass. So George Russell flew past Sergio Perez going the long way around in turns 4 and 5.
George Russell gets a lot of kudos from me on his drive after this first incident.
What a drive. He's going to be a winner for sure. Lap 17, Max Verstappen forced to pit, and the announcers even made the note of, you don't really ever get to really know when a driver is going to have to pit until they are forced to.
Yeah. Especially considering Red Bull is so good, especially Max, at managing his tires.
Lap 19 and 18 before that, there was a really good battle between Norris and Leclerc, and I think we saw the McLaren does have the edge over that Ferrari car now. Because at a certain point, Norris just dialed it in and flew past Leclerc. He's like, I'm done with this. We've been doing this for a lap and a half. I'm getting around you. Lap 26 is when the penalties start coming in. Sergio Perez was given a penalty, 5 seconds for track limits. That was the first of many to be distributed throughout the day. Our only, I guess, question on this or argument on this is that a lot of the tracks, the drivers will cut corners or they will go faster around a corner and run off the track because overall it helps them. I feel like every single track limits violation in Qatar did not help the driver at all.
No, and a lot of drivers complained about this, especially, Max Verstappen being the main one in one of the, it was either post-race interview or post-quali. It was one of them. I watch all of them. It's a lot to take in. But he even goes as far as to say, they shouldn't get penalized when they're not gaining any kind of advantage. Right. which totally makes sense because when you see these guys go off, it's not because they're carrying so much speed and they're trying to really nail it for this last corner. No, it's because they get a snap of oversteer and then we got to
back
recorrect.
end fishtails, something like that, and they go off the track and they end up losing time and then they get penalized for it. So that was the first of many. I won't call it the rest, but that was the first of many for the day. Lap 31, an interesting radio call. Max Verstappen was told, "Hey, Max, let's have a managed increase in pace." And Max said, "What's that?" And then they proceeded to say, "Pick up the pace a little, but make it sustainable."
Which I guess, if you think about it in terms of tires, it makes sense. They're saying, hey, you're doing a great job managing your tires. We need a little bit more pace, but continue to think about managing those tires.
Alonso ruined his race on lap 33 where he ran off in the gravel, proceeded to get passed by Leclerc. He basically just went on a turn. He went up on a curb and tried to turn on the curb and had no grip. So he ran off in the gravel.
Alonso struggled around here.
He definitely did.
Struggled.
Lap 41, Sergio was given another penalty. So at this point, even if he does his recovery drive and gets up into the top 5 or whatever, he's got 10 seconds of penalties being tacked onto his day. Lap 44, you start to see the fastest lap be traded between Verstappen and the McLarens, which I thought was very cool. There was a key pit stop for Piastri. Was it the fastest one ever, or was that the 2-second one?
No, it was the fastest one ever, I believe.
No,
that one, I think. Oh,
dang
it, now I don't remember if it was Lando or Piastri.
I know Piastri had a flat 2-second, and then Norris had a 1.8, right?
1.8, the fastest, not even like 1.86 or anything like that, because I think that's the previous record. 1.80.
Yeah, incredible. McLaren was just on at this point in the year, which is a drastic change from how they started the year when they were just a dumpster fire of a team.
It was Lando.
Okay. So lap 45, a key moment in the race. Norris had pit after Piastri the lap before, comes out wheel to wheel with Oscar Piastri, and Piastri maintains the 3rd spot, putting Lando Norris in 4th at that point. Russell then pits later on, I believe, who was in 2nd, and that's how your order gets mixed up to the final order that we end up seeing.
Which I looked away from the TV from this. I actually had to go back and watch the race a couple times because the first time I had a lot of people distracting me, but that's fine. When I first watched this, I looked at my screen and I was like, oh, Max is up by 30 seconds. And then it's McLaren's. Cool. And then all of a sudden, then it's George Russell. And then I look back and George is in 4th and the McLarens are right on the tail of Max. I was like, hey, I just missed something.
Yeah, he came out right there wheel to wheel with him, and then I was like, "Oh man, it's gonna be a fight to the end." Then I was like, "Oh wait, Russell still has to pit," and he was on the softs they were trying to carry along. I don't know what they were doing, but lap 47, key message comes in to Lando Norris. Lando, we are going to hold position.
Yeah,
which it worked out with Piastri getting 2nd in the race, but Norris was faster.
Yeah, and Norris was also not happy about that.
He wasn't happy. And it would be a different story if maybe they were trading fastest laps or if Verstappen had the fastest lap. Norris was consistently running the fastest lap times.
Which is why I said earlier when we were talking about Oscar being a new up and rising star in the future of Formula One, he's just not there yet.
Right.
Just not there. Lando's clearly got the edge still in every single feature race that they do. And majority of the time, every qualifying, but unless he shunts it at the last corner.
Last note on the race, lap 49, they go to K-Mag, who's irrelevant at this point, down in 14th. And they go, Kevin Magnussen, go to Bravo 10 position. And he goes, it doesn't make any sense.
And then I don't know if you heard Crofty, he came on there, but he was like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know what that is.
So your race finishes, and you have, of course, Max Verstappen winning the race, Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris round out your podium, followed by George Russell with an incredible recovery drive after getting knocked out by his own teammate at the start of the race. Charles Leclerc in 5th, followed by Alonso, Ocon, Bottas, Zhou Guan Yu.
What a great
getting
drive.
9th. And then finally, Sergio Perez getting 1 point.
Hey, Lance Stroll got 11th. Woohoo.
It's like he wasn't even there. If you don't finish in the top 10, you might as well have not raced.
So you said Sergio got, around 10 seconds of penalties? So he would have finished probably around 9th, 8th?
He was 1 second away from getting beat by Lance Stroll.
Yikes.
But yeah, he did have a 4-second gap on him and Joe, so that certainly hurt him. He wouldn't have gotten up into 8th, but he could have gotten 9th, I believe. Okay, let's talk a little bit about really quickly winners and losers and then our thoughts from the race. My winners for the day, McLaren and George Russell. Pretty self-explanatory, but the McLaren's going 2 and 3, and then George Russell just having the incredible coincidence of getting drilled by a teammate on the turn 1 and then recovering all the way back into 4th. He could have gotten a podium spot, but their tire management would have needed to be perfect, and it just wasn't.
You did winners and losers, right?
I didn't do losers yet.
Let me hear your losers.
Losers, Lewis Hamilton. What a trash drive for all of 8 seconds.
Actually, it was a great drive, and then it went bad real fast.
And AlphaTauri, I think we'd seen a lot recently from Liam Lawson. Of course, Yuki has his ups and downs, but this was a down week for both of them where Yuki finishes 15th, Lawson finishes 17th. I was really wanting Liam to get some points in his probably going to be his final race.
Yeah.
As I've seen a lot of social videos coming out from AlphaTauri with Danny Rick in Austin. So I know he's getting back behind the wheel.
He loves Austin.
He does.
Danny loves Austin.
So I just wanted to see something out of Liam Lawson. So I've got to put them as a loser this week.
So I've got a few winners and losers. For winners, Max Verstappen, obviously 2023 Drivers' Champion. McLaren, as an overall, for going 2-3, again, on an amazing race by both of them. George Russell, I have him in my winners column for an amazing recovery drive. Yep. We talked about that. Alfa Romeo as a whole, because it wasn't just Zhou going 9th, it was Bottas going 8th. So Alfa Romeo goes 8 and 9 to finish the Grand Prix.
First double points finish? This season?
I think so.
I'm going to look that up while you give your rest.
Losers, I've got 5 losers. I'll tell you, I know exactly why each one is a loser. I have all of their time totals for their penalties.
Okay.
Perez, 15 seconds, which also would have put him in 8th, by the way. Gasly, 15 seconds. You're a loser. Stay on the track. Lance Stroll, loser for multiple reasons, but also 10 seconds. Alex Albon, this one hurts. I love you, bro, but you got 10 seconds of penalties, and you didn't score points, which makes my predictions wrong. And the final one, Lewis Hamilton, for his horrible mistake in turn 1.
That is the first double points finish for the Alfa Romeo team.
All right.
8 and 9.
Look at him go.
The closest they'd been before that was 9 and 11th in Australia.
Well, with that being said, let's dog on Qatar a little bit.
Yeah, so one, it's flipping hot.
Change the time of year that you do the race.
That is the most exhausted I've seen the drivers. When they go to the cool down room and you have not only Oscar Piastri, but Max Verstappen, a guy that makes $60 million a year, laying down on the ground.
Yeah.
That says something about where George Russell looked disheveled.
Esteban Ocon threw up in the middle of the race.
What a beating.
I can't remember who the driver was, but one of them actually had to go to an ambulance immediately and got taken to the hospital. Other than that, other drivers, you see them just struggling to pull themselves out of the car if they're not being helped by somebody else.
I know Lance Stroll went and stumbled to an ambulance. There was a video of him struggling to get out of his car.
That might have been it.
The tires couldn't hold up. They've got to put maximum lap stint numbers on tires. That's a beating. And then the other thing, as I'm sitting there watching the race, I didn't get the feeling that I was watching a premier sporting event. There wasn't a lot of crowd noise. There wasn't a lot of crowd shots. The scenery around the track is
boring.
Non-existent.
Boring.
It's just like Bahrain does it better than that, and it's surrounded by desert. But they have colorful stuff and lights and all this stuff to look around. Abu Dhabi surrounds their place with lighted structures.
So that's what I was about to say is if you're talking about desert, we have way more races in the Middle East, and they aren't like that. I mean, Bahrain's
the closest.
Bahrain's the closest, but it's still not as boring as that. Saudi Arabia is a cool background.
Jeddah looks awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, the season ends in Abu Dhabi.
Looks awesome.
Gorgeous. And then we have the Losail
Every
International
area
Circuit.
shot is just sand and dirt and lights. There's no elevation to the track. Again, the crowd wasn't really with it.
They didn't even show the camel track.
I didn't feel like I was watching a Grand Prix for the biggest sport in the world right now.
You go to the Netherlands and it's just engulfed in orange smoke. You go here, you go there. Now, granted, I believe they had fireworks. That's fine. Whatever. But Plant some trees. I know obviously you can't have a crazy scenery, but build something.
It was
a water feature,
It
something.
was the combination of the weird sprint race weekend. It was the weird tire situation. It was the drivers being exhausted. It was the track limits penalties, the no atmosphere. The heat. The race itself wasn't a great race. You know, there wasn't a lot of dog fights. There wasn't a lot
bunch of pit
action.
stops. So you're looking at undercuts and overcuts. There wasn't really a lot of wheel to wheel. It was pretty much people passing on the main straight.
Yeah. And we're honest here. We love F1, but sometimes there's races that just don't hit. And this was one of those.
And they're on a 10-year contract.
They've got to trick it up somehow.
Something.
Put the camel racing right next door and let us have a dual camera setup.
Excuse me. What if they turned it into a hybrid of a street and a circuit race, a race circuit and a street race? So you have the actual circuit that's actually specifically for that, but you put up these big barriers so that it looks and feels like a street race. That would block out a lot of the dust. That would cancel out a lot of the wind that was causing a lot of drivers to fly off the track. I feel like, and it would add a danger factor because right now when they fly off, they just fly into dirt for, I don't know, 50 yards.
Well, that's the other thing. There's no like general admission around the track or any other grandstands outside of the main straight.
Yeah, I mean, they need to have
there was nothing to look at.
They need to have some kind of hills, even for like people that just want to bring a lawn chair. Add more grandstands on the backside. Turns 12, 13,
Screens,
14 is exciting.
Lights,
yes.
structures.
Well, they have the lights. They were the first tracks
No,
to
like
do it.
colorful lights, not just lighting up the track lights. Like, give us something to look at that doesn't make it feel like these guys are like it felt like a COVID race, right? Like,
yes,
nothing
it
around
felt like
it.
nobody was there. Overall, I give the Losail International Circuit and the 2023 running of the Qatar Grand Prix a thumbs down. Not a good race.
And let's hope that it gets better. They had a weekend attendance of 120,000. That's not great.
I mean, it's a lot of people, but when you put it in comparison to some of these other races, it doesn't even come close.
Not at all. I mean, that's what like the US Grand Prix gets in one day.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot what track we covered the attendance on, but it was something to the effect of 250, 300,000 for the entire weekend.
Almost all of them are like that. We looked specifically, we're trying to figure out what's like the cheapest race to go to in Formula One. And I think we decided it was Baku in Azerbaijan, and they have like a race attendance or something of like 80,000 people or something like that.
Y'all are going to see me next year hanging out of the castle window. Wow!
But even that, I mean, Azerbaijan could be considered a Middle Eastern country that goes through this old historic city.
Oh, yeah.
I get that they're signed up with Qatar for that. I don't know if they can change venues. Like, can we race in the streets of Doha, Qatar? Can we do that?
Or just add the walls. Add something different. Make it unique.
Yeah. Right now, it's just a flat go-kart goat track, basically.
Goat track?
I mean... I didn't enjoy it. I mean, we still like the sport. Obviously, Max gets his champion. We see Oscar do well. Great. But I want a spectacle.
Right. That about wraps it up, I think. Do you have any other leaning thoughts?
Last thing. I had predicted a finishing order of Verstappen, Perez, and Leclerc. Pretty much all wrong except for Verstappen. You had predicted Verstappen, Norris, and Hamilton. A little bit better.
That's kind of close.
A little bit better. Although the Hamilton thing was wrong.
Yeah, the second he went out, I went, and there went my predictions on turn one.
All right, let us know in the comments what you think of the Qatar Grand Prix. Are you excited about its 10-year run? What would you change about it? Let us know.
Guys, if you think that Max Verstappen should abandon Red Bull altogether and try something new, I want to see him take Alpine to the top. I don't know, something random.
All right, we'll see it.
Bye, guys.